Hi dear students, in this video lecture we will continue with chapter number 15 of kinesiology, that is muscle strength. Today we will discuss muscle weakness and paralysis. Then further causes of muscle weakness and the prevention will also be discussed in detail. Further we also discuss strengthening method used. Now let's start. Muscle weakness happens when your full effort does not produce a normal muscle contraction or movement. It is sometimes called as reduced muscle strength. It is also known as muscle weakness, as you can say weak muscles. Whether you are ill or simply need rest, short-term muscle weakness happens to nearly everyone at some point. A tough workout, for example, will exhaust your muscle until you are given them a chance to recover with rest. If you do develop persistent muscle weakness or muscle weakness with no apparent cause or normal explanation, it may be a sign of an underlying health condition. Voluntary muscle contractions are usually generated when your brain sends a signal through your spinal cord and nerves to muscles. If your brain nervous system, muscles or connections between them are injured or affected by the disease, your muscles may not contract normally. This can produce muscle weakness. Weakness or loss of the power in any muscle or group of the muscles not only results in loss of the movement or stability of a particular joint but creates a state of the muscle imbalance which affects all the groups concerned in the production of the coordinated movements. If the weakened muscles are to recover their full function, they must be protective, while they are ineffective and encouraged by the re-education as they recover until they are able finally to take place once more as effective members of the team of the muscles which work together to perform natural and scared movements. Causes of the muscle weakness. As contraction is the only means by which muscle power can be maintained or increased, any lean or habit which prevents or limits contraction will result in the loss of power and muscle wasting. Complete loss of the muscle power is known as paralysis and partial loss as paresis, or the muscle may be merely weak or subnormal. Number 1. Lesions affecting motor pathways. Destruction of the anterior horn cells result in permanent inactivity of the motor unit. For example, flaccid paralysis. Anterior horn disease is one of a number of the medical disorders affecting the anterior horns of the spinal cord. Anterior horn diseases include spinal muscular atrophy, poliomyelitis, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Number 2. Lesions affecting the motor pathways. Damage to the motor pathways preventing it from conducting impulses essential for the contraction basically results in paralysis. Spastic paralysis results from upper motor neuron and flaccid paralysis result from the lower motor neuron. Lesions affecting the muscle tissue. Degeneration of the muscle tissue results in the loss of the power which is usually progressive, for example muscular dystrophy. Ischemia causes structural changes, that is, Workman ischemic contracture, and the extensive scar tissue may replace the contractile tissue as a result of the deep flesh injuries. In Workman contracture, the muscles of the forearm severely injured. This leads to the contracture deformities of the fingers, hand, and wrist. Basically, Workman contracture occurs when there is a lack of blood flow or ischemia to the forearm. This occurs when there is increased pressure due to swelling and condition called compartment syndrome. Number 4. Discharge of the nerve and muscle tissue. Loss of the power and wasting from discharge is by no means uncommon. A patient may not use his muscles because he cannot, as the contraction is inhibited by pain or the sensory impulses, because he does not need to. Joints fixed by the splintage are stable and unable to move. Therefore, there is no necessity for the patient to contract the muscles. It is only when he is instructed and convinced of the necessity of doing so that he will perform voluntary static contractions to maintain the circulation, muscle power, and the movement of the tendon passing over the temporally joints, which are essential for recovering of the function when splintage is removed, because he will not. Some patients resist all efforts on the part of the both doctors and physiotherapists to make them do sufficient muscle contraction to prevent discharge atrophy. Some constitutional diseases, a marked decay of muscle wasting which cannot be put down entirely to discharge, occur in some diseases, notably in rheumatoid arthritis. Functional. There is no organic cause, but the muscles don't function, although they may not be forced to contract. They may be forced to contraction by electrical stimulation of the nerves. Autoimmune disease such as Graves' disease, myasthenia gravis, and Guillain-Barré syndrome. Thyroid conditions such as hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. Electrolyte imbalances such as hypokalemia, potassium deficiency, hypomagnesia such as magnesium deficiency, and hypercalcemia, that is elevated calcium in your blood. Complication from certain virus infection. Muscle weakness can also be caused by the complication from certain virus infection, including polio, rheumatic fever, and botulism. Prolonged use of the certain drugs may also result in muscle weakness. These drugs include statins and other lipid-lowering agents, anti-arrhythmic drugs such as amiodarone or procainamide, corticosteroids, colchicine, which is used to treat gout. Prevention of muscle wasting. In this, we basically treat the cause that we already discussed. In flaccid palsy, muscle deprived of the motor nerve supply are limp, hypotonic, and unable to contract. Rapid wasting takes place and cannot be prevented, although it is thought that it can be arrested basically by improving the blood supply to the area by stimulation of the muscle fibers by the electrical means. Although little can be done to prevent wasting in these cases, basically measures are taken to keep both the muscles and joint structures in as good condition as possible in preparation for return to normal function. Principles of the treatment during flaccid palsy. Affected muscles may be protected from the prolonged overstretching by adequate support and splintage. Normal muscles protect themselves from overstretching by reflex contraction, but those suffering from flaccid palsy are unable to do as they are incapable of contraction. Consequently, they may become stretched beyond their physiological limit and injured by the force of gravity or the unopposed action of the healthy antagonistic muscle. For example, look. A lesion affecting the anterior tibial nerve results in a dropped foot as gravity and unopposed action of the calf muscles plantar flexes the foot. To prevent injury to the anterior tibial muscles, a splint or toe spring must be worn until the power of contraction is sufficient to restore muscle balance. Number 2. Circulation to the area must be maintained to ensure adequate nutrition to the paralyzed muscles by the active exercise for other normal muscles in the area. Contrast both sector. Palsies lead to the coldness or blueness of the area, indicating poor circulation. The arterial blood flow to the muscle is much increased during active work to supply oxygen and nutrition essential for repair, and at the same time the local venous return is assisted by the intermittent pressure exerted on the vessels by the contracting muscles and by the movement of the joints. Circulation delivers life-supporting blood throughout your body. It allows your heart to beat, your body to move, and your brain to perform. When this natural blood flow is not working properly, it can lead to the symptoms that initially appears in the feet and legs. Fatigue symptoms. Look at this. Fatigue or cramping during activity, cramping during inactivity, swelling and itchiness, tingling and persistent coldness. Poor circulation is often a sign of other health conditions such as obesity, high blood pressure, cholesterol, and diabetes. Another common cause of the poor circulation is the peripheral vascular disease (PVD), a condition that restricts normal blood flow to the and from the heart. A related condition, venous insufficiency, occurs when your veins are unable to effectively send blood from your legs back to your heart. This condition may result in severe leg swelling, varicose vein, and skin discoloration. Certain behaviors can also lead to the poor circulation. Tobacco smoking, lack of regular exercise, further improper diet, and sitting or standing in one place for long periods of time. This is self-assessment quiz for yourself. Are my toes red, purple, or blue? Do I have unexplained hair loss on my legs and feet? Are my feet and hands often excessively cold? Do my feet fall asleep easily? Do my feet feel better if I hang them over the edge of my bed? If you answer yes to any of these questions, you may have poor circulation. Read more to find out what you should do about the potential serious conditions. How do I treat and prevent poor circulation? Stop cigarette smoking. Keep your blood pressure and cholesterol in a healthy range. Take vitamin supplements like Q10. Drink green tea and eat high fiber diet. Exercise regularly. Avoid long periods of mobility. Elevate your legs. Sitting in a recline with your legs up can be a great simple remedy for poor circulation. Use special equipment such as leg exercises, stimulate circulation and improve blood flow. Wear sports socks to improve circulation. If you are wearing them for the first time, start by wearing light to moderate sport products so that you grow accustomed to the tight and feel of the graduated sport. Related activities, walking and bicycling are very helpful activities to improve circulation. Number 3. The range of movement in the joint immobilized by the pulses and extensibility of the affected muscle must be maintained by the passive movements. The fibrous tissue which constitutes the sheath of the muscles, ligaments or fascia undergo adaptive shortening if subjected to prolonged immobilization. One full range movement is frequent interval is sufficient to prevent this, and in practice 2 full range passive movements performed twice a daily found to be adequate. When muscle work over more than one joint, they must be stretched over these joints at the same time. Example, wrist and finger flexors. Wrist and finger must be fully extended in one movement. Number 4. The remembrance of the pattern of the movement must be stimulated and kept alive by the passive movement, while the active movement is impossible. Movement is associated in the brain with the numerous sensory impulses from the joint, muscles, scans and eyes. In the absence of voluntary movement, stimulation of these sensory impulses by the passive movement may remind the brain of the pattern of movement in preparation for the time when the motor pathway will once more be intact. In this case, coordinated movement made possible again by the return of the power to the affected muscles. It is remembered and does not require to be relearned or redeveloped. The passive movements used for this purpose must obviously follow the natural pattern of the movement with regard to the group movements of the joints. The strength and use of the normal muscles in the area must be maintained by the basically resisted exercise. Unless the limb is flail or muscle paralyzed, all possible activities encouraged. Thus, wasting from disuse is prevented and circulation to the part is improved. For example, a man with anterior tibial palsy is able to walk about provided he wears a toe spring, and the advantage of his being able to work is obviously so obvious. Spastic paralysis. Muscles which receive a motor nerve supply only in response to spinal reflex, since they are cut off from the higher centers by lions affecting the upper motor neurons, are tense, hypertonic and incapable of voluntary contraction and relaxation. This condition is known as spastic paralysis and wasting is not marked. This table is basically comparison between spastic paralysis and flaccid paralysis. You can say upper motor neuron disease versus lower motor neuron disease. Upper motor neuron lesions, the neurons in the brain and spinal cord that activate the motor neurons, and lower motor neurons, spinal and cranial nerve nuclei that likely innervates the muscles. Hyperactive deep tendon reflexes. Muscle wasting is a prominent feature in flaccid paralysis. Clonus is a sign of spastic paralysis, and there is hypotonia in flaccid paralysis. Positive Babinski sign and absence of the muscle atrophy is a sign of spastic paralysis, and hypotonia and hyperreflexia are signs of flaccid paralysis. Typical posturing of the spastic upper extremity in patient with right hemiplegia due to cerebral palsy. The elbow is flexed with forearm pronated, with elbow with wrist flexion and ulnar deviation, and thumb in palm deformity. When a limb or segment of the body is locked in spasm, circulation is basically impeded and muscle and joint contraction may develop over a period of time. The aim of the treatment is to initiate movement to maintain normal joint range and muscle extensibility, and at the same time improve the circulation. While the limb remains immobile, any potential for voluntary control is masked by the spasm. Flexible movement initiated by means of the proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation techniques, that is, stretch stimulus coupled with the command for voluntary effort, develop any voluntary control which remains and may lead to a permanent reduction in spasm. Controlled sustained passive stretching also inhibits the spasm sufficiently to permit movements. Active or passive mobilization may be preceded by massage or packing with ice to reduce spasm and make movements easier. Look at this. Spasticity can be reduced by basically performing stretching exercise daily. Prolonged stretching can make muscles longer, helpful to decrease spasticity and prevent contracture. Further, splintage, casting and bracing. These methods are used to maintain range of motion and flexibility. Oral medication used to treat spasticity include baclofen, dantrolene, sodium diazepam, diazepam, clonazepam, gabapentin, and the final option is surgery. And permanently of the muscle tissue. In this case, loss of power cannot be arrested, although temporary improvement often follows slight exercise. In this case, which have not previously received treatment, this is probably the result of making the best use of the fibers which still function. In distal atrophy. Distal atrophy or wasting can be prevented or controlled by the frequent voluntary contraction. Exercise can be performed in any range possible or statically if necessary. The basically intensity of the contraction and frequency with which they are practiced is directly proportional to the success in maintaining the power and bulk of the muscles. 5 minutes in every hour with maximum effort is a good slogan for general purpose. Patients who have difficulty in learning static contractions and finding the muscles can be helpful by Freudism in the initial stages. This electrical stimulation can also be used to improve the patient that contraction is possible, and but he must be convinced that it is necessary to achieve the best results. And regular practice is ensured only when the patient understands the necessity for effort on his part. Comparison of the effective group with the healthy muscles on the corresponding limb is often convincing. Patients readily appreciate the difference in shape, feeling of tension, and the evidence of measurements of the two limbs when these are pointed out to them. Coarse muscles such as gastrocnemius, quadriceps, gluteus, and deltoid waste very rapidly and therefore require special attention. The wasting in rheumatoid arthritis, some of which is due to disuse, is combated by the active contraction as soon as and often as the condition will allow. If there is no organic constitutional disease, for example, rheumatoid arthritis, then muscle atrophy from disuse can be prevented or controlled by basically strong and frequent contraction against resistance as wasting occurs because an insufficient demand is made to elicit a strong enough contraction. Exercise must be carried out within the limits of the disability, but with skill and imagination this can be organized. Any type of the active work is suitable provided that the right muscles are activated sufficiently to maintain or improve their normal strength and endurance. Exercise with manual resistance is advisable in the early stage to make sure that contraction is pain-free and satisfactory, and to give the physiotherapist the opportunity to assess the patient capacity for activity and to give instruction in those activities that he must practice on his own. It is important that patient should fully understand and appreciates the need for his own effort to ensure his cooperation in carrying out a regime of pre-exercise, the slogan of which is 5 minutes in every hour. If his cooperation is doubtful or his ability to exert voluntary effort is reduced, he will require constant supervision and individual treatment. Whenever possible, the patient should continue with his normal work. When this is impossible, other occupational activities suitable to his abilities can be substituted. Because suitable games and sports of a competitive nature supply our demands for activity but need careful supervision and control to avoid development of the trick movements, for example development of a fairly pattern of walking in order to move rapidly. Now we'll start with early re-education, initiation of the muscle contraction. Basically, denervated muscles are incapable of contraction except by the direct stimulation of the muscle fibers by suitable electrical means. Innervated muscles contract in response to demand for activity provided the demand is sufficient. As contraction is the only means by which the muscles regain their normal function, it is essential that a response is obtained as soon as possible from the muscles affected by the paralysis. The lesion causing paralysis and inactivity which follow both increase the threshold of excitability of the anterior horn cells. Once the acute phase of the lesion has passed, reactivation of the motor unit is possible except when there has been permanent damage, for example death of the cell or lack of continuity of its axons. The anterior horn cell is much more difficult to stimulate when its threshold is increased, therefore it fails to react to the normal level of stimulation, in which case the patient maximum voluntary effort of contraction is insufficient to gain a response. In increasing the demand is required and supplied by the stimulation of the sense receptors, that is proprioceptors and exteroceptors, which discharges impulses to the anterior horn cells to increase central excitation and lower the threshold of the cells. With the low threshold, basically we have to lower the threshold. With the low threshold, the anterior horn cells are more easily stimulated, and the arrival of basically repetitive stimuli reduces the threshold still more and facilitates the passage of impulses along all the nervous pathways used. When stimulated, the anterior horn cells discharge impulses to the muscle fibers, which responds by contraction. A single discharge of the muscle impulse results in a muscle twitch, but discharged repeatedly sufficiently frequently lead to a summation and sustained contraction. Measures used to obtain initiation of the contraction. Warm. The area affected must be warm at moderate warm improve the basically quality of the contraction. Any method designed to improve the circulation in this area is effective. Active exercise of infected muscles against strong resistance is the method of choice. Stabilization. Stabilization of the bones of region of the affected muscles, the joints distal to those over which these muscles work, improve their efficiency. Whenever possible, we can say stabilization should be achieved by the isometric contraction of the strong synergist muscles working against maximum resistance. Therefore, effort reinforces that of the muscles in question. For example, for initiating elbow flexors, the shoulder and wrists are stabilized by the flexors working against resistance applied by the physiotherapist's hand. Grip or manual contact. The physiotherapist's hand gives pressure only in the direction of the movement. To direct the patient effort and give transit stimulation. Stretch. Stimulation of the muscle stimulus elicits reflex contraction of the diaphragm muscle provided the reflex arc is intact, but controlled sustained stretching of the affected muscles and limit of its extended range is followed immediately by the patient maximum effort of contraction. Thus we can say now stretch, then pull, let it move. The muscle must be stretched in all the components of the action, and the more accurate the stretch, the greater effect for producing a contraction. Prolonged stretching or failure to allow a muscles to shorten inhibits the contraction. The command for voluntary effort must be brief, forceful, and timed to coincide with the stretch reflex. The stretch reflex is applied several times in quick succession and then repeated after a short rest for as long as satisfactory response is obtained. Some muscles don't respond to the stretch reflex applied from the lengthened range as well as others. For example, tricep, once the ability to initiate contraction is established, muscle strengthening continues until the normal function is restored. Irradiation. The use of the resistance to the functional movement of the opposite limbs, which normally produce fixator action on the other side, can assist initiation of contraction in the affected muscle. For example, resistance to the extension abduction pattern of the one arm results in extension abduction of the other arm to prevent the body rolling towards the moving arm. The use of the resistance to strong muscle group, which normally works with affected muscles, also encourages contraction of the muscles. For example, the eating pattern involves flexion of the shoulder, elbow, wrist and fingers. Therefore, strong resistance given to the shoulder, wrist and finger flexor will stimulate the flexors of the elbow to contract. Now, we discussed strengthening methods used. Re-education. The art of training or strengthening muscles lies in creating a condition under which they are called upon to work to full capacity against an ever-increasing resistance. Basically, increase in the strength and hypertrophy occurs in response to an increase in intramuscular tension set upon the factors which oppose their contraction. It is therefore essential that the opposing factors which constitute the resistance must be increased as the strength of the muscle improves. Basically, increase in resistance, which is too rapid, results in overloading, which prevents contraction and may damage the muscles. Underloading will not increase strength but may be sufficient to prevent wasting of the muscles. At the beginning of the treatment, assessment of the strength of the muscle is essential. A suitable resistance then selected, which includes consideration of the nature of the resisting force, leverage, speed, and the duration of the movement. As treatment strength develops, as treatment continues, then progression of the one or all of these factors is made as the muscle strength develops. Account must be made of the work muscles in question are called upon to do, whether it be the exercise in the physiotherapy department, occupational therapy, specific home exercise work, or any activities of everyday life. Re-education may be regarded as a continuous process which begins while the muscles are still paralyzed in the form of an attempted initiation of contraction and extends until maximum function is achieved. The exact stage in this re-education process at which any particular muscle group begins is determined by the findings at the assessment made when the treatment begins. Look at this. Treatment to increase muscle strength and function. Once the power of the contraction has been regained, the muscles are strengthened progressively until maximum function is obtained. So, passive movement, sport, and artificial methods of assisting the circulation are discontinued gradually and are replaced by the active exercise. Principle of treatment to increase strength and function. Affected muscles must be strengthened progressively by resisted exercise, which are specific for the group to which the muscles belong. Range. The range of movement is increased. Type of the muscle work. Concentric, eccentric, and static muscle work are elicited resistance. Resistance increased by increasing the poundage of the resistance, by increasing the leverage of the resistance. Speed. Increase or decrease in the speed of the movement is a progression for concentric work. Decrease in the speed is a progression for eccentric work. Lengthening of the contraction period is a progression for static holding. Duration. Increase in the number of the times an exercise performed or decrease in the rest period between each series of the exercise or a combination of the both according to the circumstances makes more work for all the muscles. Full function of the affected muscles are members of the team of the muscles which work to produce scale and coordinated movement must be restored by free activities, normal and scaled movements. Basically, progression of these exercise follows a line similar to those started for resisted exercise. Pendulum movements requiring relatively little power are used at first to assist in the restoration of the muscle balance, progressing to slow, sustained, or rapid movements requiring more power. Small range movements in which many joints must be controlled are the most highly skilled. Type of exercise used to strengthen muscles and to restore functions. All active exercise maintain and increase muscle power. Weak muscles are provided with work suitable to their capacity by the use of assisted, free, or resisted exercise, while objective, recreational, occupational activities ensures the return to functional use. It cannot be overemphasized that the choice of a particular exercise does not necessarily ensure that the desired effect. It is the manner and the speed with which the basically exercise performed determine the effect it produces. In general, strengthening exercise are slow and precise. Assisted exercise. These are rarely used to strengthen muscle except in case of the flaccid paralysis when their power is insufficient to overcome the resistance of gravity. Friction or the tension of the opposing muscles. In practical, it is preferred to eliminate gravity by sport and reduce friction by the use of powered and polished re-education board. Free exercise. Basically, free exercise are most valuable as they can be practiced at regular frequent intervals and at home. Careful selection of the starting position and accurate teaching ensures the use of the muscles in question and get the exercise to match the capacity for work. Assisted exercise. These exercises create the tension in the muscle essential for increasing the muscle power and hypertonicity. Their relative Localization of the affected muscle group helps to restore the balance of the muscle power more rapidly, and so prevent trick movement and strain elsewhere. PNF is most effective. Repeated contractions, slow reversal, and rhythmic stabilization are suitable techniques, activities. They are basically essential to ensure integrated action of the muscle groups in the production of the movements. They also restore confidence and general health. Measurement of the progress, basically assessment, how to measure the progress. Assessment of the progress, reassessment of the patient ability is made at frequent intervals to guide progression of the activities and estimate progress. The basically only suitable method of measuring progress lies in estimating the return of the function as the muscle work to produce coordinated movement and joint stability. Bulk can be measured by using a tape measure around the circumference of a limb at a specific level. Power can be measured by recording the poundage of resistance moved under standard condition. For example, bulk of the knee extensors may be estimated by measurement around the circumference of the thigh at the level 2 inches and 5 inches above the base of patella. The power is measured by means of static or dynamic tests, but real test of progress is the patient's ability to use the muscles to walk or climb stairs correctly. Thank you. Hopefully you all like this chapter.